Hello chess friends and welcome to your out of chess channel and welcome back to the TCEC season 26 Superfinal between the two top engines Stockfish 16 and the Leela-0. As I'm recording this video, the result is +5 for Stockfish after 44 rounds. We'll still see 56 games between the two top engines, but if nothing dramatically changes, I think Stockfish will be the winner of a new TCEC season. As the title says, where Leela fails, basically Stockfish prevails because Stockfish is winning most of the times the prearranged openings by the organizers. Whenever Leela-0 has an advantage in the opening stage, in the early opening stage, Stockfish manages somehow to pull off a draw, which is a huge performance, I think, by Stockfish, because sometimes the evaluation after the prearranged openings by the organizers is even +1 for one engine, and still Stockfish manages sometimes to make a draw even in this bad opening. So that's, I think, the huge difference between Stockfish and Leela-0, because Stockfish always finds tactical ideas in order to make a draw. And I've sorted out now one beautiful game from this TCEC season 26 Superfinal. This game you have now requested several times. It's not, I think, such a tactical game, but I think it has really great endgame ideas, really spectacular also opening theory of the Leningrad Dutch, which is, I think, also a very often played opening. I think it could be a certain surprise weapon for Black whenever Black is trying maybe to spice up the game. But I think here you see the most important also strategic ideas from White's perspective, how to beat, how to dismantle the Leningrad Dutch. So let's start now with the game here with the white pieces. The fish opened with the move d4. Leela's response was g6. The game started as a mortar defense, but now after a move knight to f3 f5, we have now this Leningrad Dutch setup with g6 f5. Now basically Black is trying to play d6 and in some lines trying somehow to make the e5 goal. So we have now g3. The king had to attack, bishop to g7, bishop to g2, knight to f6, kingside castling, c4 and d6 is now the standard setup here by White, also against the Leningrad Dutch. And here we have the common also set up by Black with this d6 concept. The basic idea, as I said, in the Leningrad Dutch for Black is try to somehow play the move queen to e8, c6, and then to hit simply the center with the move e5, trying to get a very nice pawn mobility here on this side of the board. If you manage to put off f5 in a good way, then f5 could be pardon me, e5. If you can play e5 in a good way, then e4 f4 is, I think, a good strategic plan then for Black. We have now d5 by the fish. So the fish is not allowing e5 to be played here by Leela-0. Leela continues now with c5. We have knight to c3, and now the last move that was prearranged by the organizer was now the move knight to a3. Here in this particular position, I would say White is slightly better. Nothing spectacular, nothing dramatically is going on now in the position, but because of this weak hole in Black's camp, I think strategically White has, of course, a slightly edge. White has now a beautiful attacking possibility, especially if you put something here around the square e6, then it could be very dangerous here for Black. In the game, rook to e1. Stockfish is trying immediately to somehow battle for the e6 square, prepares now the breakthrough idea here with the move e4. We have queen to e8. Leela is, of course, battling, is trying still somehow maybe to make e5 happen, but now Stockfish continues with e4, f takes e4. Stockfish doesn't want to recapture here with the knight, because after knight to e4, knight takes e4, rook to e4, you get an extra tempo with bishop to f5, and Black is, I think, pretty solid. So that's why knight to g5. We have now a triple, well, now 4 times we have attacked now the pawn on e4. This pawn is undefendable, so that's why Leela-0 gives up, of course, the battle for the e4 square, but at least develops now the bishop to f5. Stockfish continues with knight from c to e4, gets the pawn back. We have knight to e4, and now bishop to e4. I think this is the correct way. If we play here knight to e4, instead of bishop to e4, then you don't battle anymore for the e6 square. You have already played knight to g5 in order to somehow put your piece there around the square e6. So that's why bishop to e4, very good move, because if you play now bishop to e4 immediately, then after rook to e4, I don't see a good way how we're going to battle for the e6 square. You can play maybe knight to c7, but then queen to e2, and I think strategically again black has several problems around the square. Also here around the square e7, this is a backward pawn, very tough to defend now here for black. So that's why for bishop to e4, Leela c0 plays immediately knight to c7, battles now for the e6 square, but in some lines also prepares now, look at this, the move b5, because the bishop is very dangerous here on this diagonal, and if b5 happens, then if the b file clears, then the rook could come into the game, and black has also good attacking chances on the queen side. So that's why Stockfish stops that with the move a4. We have a bishop to e4, knight takes e4 here by Stockfish, but still Leela continues, I think, here with the problems. F7 weak, D7 weak, E6 is also weak, so many strategic disadvantages I think here for black. Still black continues of course the game with this powerful bishop that's targeting here the b2 weakness in white's position. Stockfish Leela continues with queen to d7. We have now bishop to f4, good move by the fish, because if you play now bishop takes b2 immediately, then you run into, I think, a tactical line here. After rook to b1, we can simply attack the rook. You're trying maybe to defend this pawn, but now look at this again, knight to g5, knight to e6 is the threat. You're trying maybe to improve your pawn on b7, you're pushing it to b6, but now rook to e4 is coming. Look at this, you're trying to get back, and even in some lines I think we can even sacrifice the exchange here. This wasn't played in the game, but I wanted to show you how dangerous really the Leningrad Dutch can become for black, because look at this, after c takes d4, queen to d4, you're trying maybe finally to improve the position around the square e6 by playing e5, but now we pin the knight. You're trying something like this, but look at this, knight to e4, knight to d6 is going to happen, knight to f6. So this is just one line, but I really wanted to show you how tactically rich this position can be for white. You can even sack the exchange, you have a beautiful piece activity, black's king is exposed, the rooks are not so useful in this position, so that's why very messed up here position for black. So see, after move bishop to f4, you don't have time, I think, to take the pawn on b2, because you first of all you have to worry about the b7 square, but then also around the square e6. So in my opinion, not a good line here for black. So after bishop to f4, that's why b6 immediately by Leela. Stockfish continues with queen to d2, rook to f5, and now rook to a3. The signature move, of course, by the fish, rook lift, trying, of course, to bring the rook on the e file and put more pressure against the backward pawn on e7. We have rook from a to f8, king to g2, h6, and now h4, not allowing, of course, here some breakthroughs with the move g5. Leela continues with rook to h5, queen to e2, putting more pressure again against the pawn on e7, and now here rook to f4 was played by Leela c0. Leela didn't want to tolerate anymore this dangerous bishop on f4. Leela probably calculated that it could build a beautiful blockade, it could build a beautiful fortress on the king side, and not allow here the minor pieces to have a great activity, because after g takes f4, Stockfish is left now with 3 weak pawns. Leela c0 continues, of course, with rook to h4, created here also dangerous pass pawn, and is relying simply here on the attack around the square f4. This becomes now a main weakness in white's position. I think a decent exchange sacrifice, even the Stockfish engine suggests here that you should give up the rook for knight for the bishop. It doesn't find better solutions to this position, because obviously strategically black is having a tough time here to defend this position. So here Stockfish continues with knight to d2. If you play here bishop takes b2 again, then rook to g3 is going to happen. You have to somehow defend this position, but it gets very dangerous. The queen could be exposed. g6 very weak. We can attack again this side of the board. We can play even in some lines a5 to, after rook to b1, to somehow split the pawn chain here and include maybe this other rook into the game, especially on the b file. But then afterwards, when the rook maybe comes to the 7th rank, or when it comes to the 8th rank, it could be again a very dangerous position here for black. e7 again very weak, so not a good continuation anymore, I would say, here for black. We can take out the pawn immediately. g6 is a long-term weakness, so as I said, messed up position. So again, you don't have time to pick up the weak pawn on b2. We have now bishop to f6 by Leela, rook to h1, trying to simplify the game. Leela takes, Stockfish takes, and now queen to f5, with this idea finally to protect the g6 weakness, attacking further the f4 pawn, but also keeping this e7 protected by the bishop on f6. So Leela's move order really makes sense, and it's really tough to make anything here. It's almost impossible to break the position on the king side here, although you're up the exchange. And we have to say that the position on the queen side is also a little bit static. It's very tough for white now to open the position for the rook somehow on the b file. You have to make something like b4 and then maybe a5 in order to somehow split the pawn chain and then include the rook on the b file, because I think on the king side there's not so much that can be done, because here Leela has the advantage, especially because of this pawns, especially because of the fact that the knight could be included, knight to e8, knight to g7. So very interesting position, tough to play I think now for both sides. Although the engine gives here +1 evaluation in white's favor, I'm not sure how many humans would, I would say, convert this position into a win, because it's so hard to play. You see now what kind of a crazy idea Stockfish finds now here in the middle game stage. After queen to f5, we have rook to g3. First of all, putting more pressure against this weak pawn on g6. King to f7. Leela improves the position. Knight to e4 by the fish, and now bishop to d4. If you play something like queen to f4 here, then rook to e3 is going to happen. You have to step back. Then we takes. We trying to trade off the queens here. After a couple of trades of queens, now this goal is working. So it's also, as I said, tough to play this position for black, because if the game simplifies too much, if the pieces are off the board, then this goal is working. I think a5, you take, b takes a5, and now the rook is coming into the game. As we mentioned, on the 7th or maybe on the 8th rank, we're trying maybe to pick up this pawn this week, then also the d6 this week. Although in this imaginary scenario, of course, although black has here maybe a 3 versus 1 pawn majority, it's very hard to make anything happen here, because in order to make something you have to include your knight into the game. But when you maybe leave with your knight to the protection of the queen side, then Stockfish would pick up all of the pawns on the queen side, would create maybe a passer, and the game should be over. So not an easy position, as I said, to play. You don't have time even to pick up the pawn on f4, because then the queens could be off the board, and as we saw, it's not a good solution, because then a5 in long terms, of course, would be then the strategic advantage for white. So after knight to e4, we have bishop to d4. Leela simply improves the position of the minor piece. Stockfish continues with knight to c3, knight to e8. Now the knight comes, of course, into the defense of the king side. We have knight to b5 attacking the pawn, a6. We have knight takes d4, c takes d4, and now king to g2. Knight to g7, trying to get the knight on a beautiful square on f5 here, which is now good also solution by Leela. We have rook to d3 by the fish, attacking now the pawn. Queen to f6. We have queen to e4, queen to h4, and now queen takes d4. Now, of course, the knight comes into the game. Look at this. The knight is protecting the e7 backward pawn, protects now also the d6 weakness, and is very flexible here. It's also very powerful in the attack. And the best part about this knight is that it cannot be kicked away by any pieces here anymore by white. It's very fixed here, and Leela c0 is trying maybe to get the queen back somehow into the game, and maybe even slowly starting to push the pawn here on the king side. We have queen to e4, we have a5, king to g1, h5, and now king to f1, king to f8, queen to f3, king to e8, and now king to e1. So Stockfish is searching now for an opportunity, but has to again worry about this b2 weakness that was created in the beginning. We have now queen to h8. Leela stays on this diagonal. It's not allowing white's pieces to play freely here. If that happens, then the pawn could be taken, then the queen could be maybe included into the attack. Maybe even some perpetuals are possible. The knight is very strong here on f5, so not an easy also, as I said, to play position here. For Stockfish, we have king to f1. Stockfish reroutes the king again towards the king side. Queen to g2, queen to g7. Leela stays, of course, on this diagonal and still hits the b2 pawn. Queen to g5, knight to d4, threatening even the knight to f3. So Leela has, I think, really also decent chances here. Queen to g3 by the fish, preventing, of course, knight to f3, knight to f5 again by Leela, and you see now Leela c0 is trying to repeat moves, staying with this queen on this diagonal. We're always maybe shifting the knight to d4, then to f5, trying, of course, to do perpetuals and hope for the best, simply hoping for a draw. I think black cannot win this game anymore because black has to, first of all, always to take care of the king side, has to always, first of all, play the defensive setup. Black can only win the game, I think, if white rushes with the attack, if white somehow makes a crucial blunder in the middle game stage. So that's why Leela c0 simply repeats moves and hopes for the best here, hopes for a draw. We have queen to c3, again a simplification idea by the Stockfish engine, because if you takes and then again this backward pawn is a huge problem, then probably this pawn will be taken, and then here in the a file, on the a file, the pawn is marching again. It would be game over, I think, here for black. So after queen to c3, that's why queen to h6. We have queen to f3, and again Leela c0 stays on this diagonal, hit simply the b2 weakness. We have queen to e2, king to f8, rook to d1, we have queen to g7, and now queen to e6. Now if you take, you see how Stockfish maneuvered the king from the defense of the pawn on g6, which was, I think, very, very interesting sort of a Zugzwang, forcing black to make a move. Now when the queen is coming to g6, you don't have time now to pick up the pawn on b2, because this one is hanging, and if this one collapses, then the knight is not fixed anymore. There is now weakness on h5. The knight is not so powerful anymore because it's not supported anymore by any of these pieces. So that's why good here also move by the fish, queen to e6, and now the king doesn't have access to the square f7. If again Leela goes for the trades of queens, we saw it's not so good because of the possibility by white to play in rook to d3, rook to b3, going for the backward pawn, going then for the a pawn, and again creating a passer on the a file. That's now the issue. Black would love, I think, to simplify the game by trading off the queens, but the backward pawn on b6 is then a huge endgame problem for black. So after queen to e6, queen to h6, hitting this pawn, Stockfish goes simply here. If you take again, then again this one is falling, so that's why Leela c0 didn't take the pawn, tries of course again to stay on this diagonal to hit the b2 weakness. So we have here rook to e1, queen to h6, queen to e4, queen to h8. Again Leela c0 is simply repeating moves. We have queen to g2, again Leela protects the g6 pawn, and now queen to g5 here by the fish, knight to d4, again trying the fork. We have rook to e3, knight to f5, and now finally rook to e6. Stockfish finally found a way to include now a new attacker into the game. Leela c0 is basically forced to play now the move king to f7, protecting now the pawn on g6. But now Stockfish finds a beautiful idea, simply plays for the king. We have king to h2. You cannot take again, of course, because the g6 is then weak. So that's why Leela c0 stays and defends now the g6 weakness. We have king to h3. Stockfish is improving simply the position of the king. Stockfish doesn't have any more so many moves that could improve the position. So Stockfish is simply going first of all forwards with the king. King to g7, queen to g7, f3, h4. We have now b3. Finally, the b2 pawn is not a weakness anymore, and now after queen to g8, Stockfish simply plays queen to g1, hit simply here the weak pawn on b6. So again Leela c0 plays queen to g7. If you play here queen to b6, if you're rushing, that's what I meant, if you're rushing with the attack, then it's not so good, because then queen to a1 is happening, and then you have a problem here on the back rank. It's probably not a losing position anymore for white, but it's very, very annoying, unpleasant to handle. So then you're vulnerable to the attacks by the queen, and the knight, as we said, is very powerful. With the support of the knight, the queen is then very, very dangerous. So as I said, in this particular position, after queen to g7, you don't have to pick time to pick up the pawn on b6, but Stockfish found here really a brilliant plan. Maybe if you like, if you want to learn strategies, if you want to, I don't know, practice endgame ideas, maybe just for fun, pause the video and try to see now the best continuation here for white. I wouldn't dare to say immediately it's completely winning for white, because in human level I think this is a different game, but if you don't see now the next move, I don't think that you even have so many great winning chances. The next move that Stockfish found is almost the only move that you can make in order to win somehow this game. So as I said, take your time and see now the optimal solution of this position. Okay, here Stockfish found a beautiful idea to create at least a pass pawn. We have to create a pass pawn in this particular position, and Stockfish plays the beautiful b4. This is the way to go. So let's see now options. For instance, if you try a takes b4, this wasn't played in the game. In the game, knight to d4 was played by Leela. But if you play a takes b4, then c5. Really great move. So what should you do? For instance, you're trying b takes c5, then the pawn is marching, and now the position is simply too stretched. The knight is simply too far away from a potential protection of the promotion of the pawn on the a file. You would be forced, I don't know, to bring the knight somehow into the game, but we don't care. We just push the pawn further. After knight to e6, you get your exchange back, but after f takes d takes e6, you have to now pick up the pawn with the king, and now look at this. f5. This was such an amazing idea here by Stockfish. As I said, this wasn't played in the game because Leela0 calculated that it's losing here for black. If you pick up, for instance, the rook, you have to play king to f5. Now the queen is coming again, queen to f4, king to e6, again queen to e4, king to f7, and now a7 would actually not be good immediately. Although you are controlling the ax square, then this one is coming, and then you're vulnerable again to some perpetuals with queen to h1. So the best move after queen to d5 and something like as I said, a7 is not the best move. You have to first of all play queen to d5 because of the possibility of queen to a1. So that's why queen to d5 would be here the best continuation. After something like e6, now we play a check, and now we can trade off the queens and push the pawn further. Again, game over. Here for black. So you see, b4, such a brilliant idea. Even if you try a takes b4, then we play c5. Even if you play here d takes c5, this is not working because then rook takes b6, and then again we have a passer that's rolling. Again, the knight is simply too far away from the action. This one is weak. Again, the position is collapsing. So really stunning idea here by the fish. b4, this is the only way now to make anything out of this position for white. So in the game we have knight to d4. Leela0 continues with the pressure here against the rook, but now Stockfish finds another beautiful move, c5. We have b takes c5, and now another stunner, f5. 3 consecutive brilliant moves here by the fish. f5. What should you do? If you play here something like, I don't know, again a takes b4, then again this pawn is marching, and we saw this is not working. If you try knight to f5 here, then b takes a5 again creates here passer. It's game over here for black. If you take here, for instance, this pawn with the pawn, then again we trade off the queens here on the g file, and then we again simply pick up the pawn, and this pawn is marching here on the a file. So really beautiful position that Stockfish created here. So after move f5, that's why Leela0 took now the rook on e6. We have now d takes e6, of course, comes with a check, and now we have a similar position. Stockfish creates a passer, and I think in this particular position it's really game over here for black. Leela tries to battle queen to c3, but now Stockfish plays beautiful queen to g4. The problem is after queen to a5, queen to g6 is leading now into checkmate because you don't have a good check anymore. You don't have any checks with the queen against the king. So in the next move, we're playing queen to f7, and again the game is over here for black. So after queen to g4, good move by the fish, queen to d3 by Leela, and now f takes g6, queen to f1, doesn't matter, Stockfish can take. We have queen to e1, and now queen to g3. Again, if you trade off the queens, white's promotion is much faster than a potential promotion by black here on the c file. So after queen to g3, queen to e3, Stockfish is again trying to trade off the queens, queen to d4, and now slowly but surely Stockfish pushes the pawn further here on the a file. We have now c4. The problem is, again, you don't have time to take out this one because the king is too endangered. Here we can play even queen to g7, then the queen is coming through the f5 square. Again, there are several threats that black cannot defend anymore in this position. So you don't have time to pick up any pawns here. So that's why Leela starts to push its own pawn here on the c file. Stockfish continues with king to g4, queen to e4, and now g7. What should you do? If you take king to g7, then this pawn is marching. You're trying maybe to get the king out of the g file attack by the queen, by the possible attack with the queen on, against the king on g7. Then we play queen to c3, you take, then after queen to f3, this is obviously game over. The queen is supporting the a1 square, a8 square, pardon me. After a couple of more moves, you don't have good checks, and now the queens can be traded off. White's promotion is again much faster. So again, game over here for black. So that's why after g7 that Stockfish played, Leela c0 tried to hide behind the pawn, but Stockfish simply improves the position of the king because queen to e6 would come with the check. We have now queen takes e6, but now queen to g4, trying again to force the trade of queens. Leela c0 delivers a check, Stockfish escapes, and now Leela c0 pushes the pawn further. We have a7, queen to f7, a new check, king to h4, and now after queen to d5, Stockfish delivers a check and promotes simply to a queen, and this is obviously game over. So what should you do? Queen to a8, queen to a8, this pawn is of course stoppable. Stockfish pushes the pawn further, takes out now the piece on the c file, promotes to a new queen, and after a couple more moves, it was game over after queen to f8. So, brilliant game, I would say. Not so easy to play. These ideas that Stockfish sees, I know, are simply working in AI chess. Of course, Leela c0 is also a very strong engine, and I'm not sure when we watch now maybe the critical moment of the game in human chess, I'm not sure how many of us would dare to play this move b4. But this is simply different chess. As I said, these are 2, 3, 4, 5 consecutive brilliant moves by the fish in order to create somehow pass pawn on the a file. Really interesting idea in an endgame stage. I would say here even the best game so far from the TCEC season 26 super final between Stockfish and Leela c0. So okay, as I said, the reverse game, believe it or not, Stockfish managed to play a draw, and that's the issue about this finals, where Leela fails, Stockfish prevails. Stockfish finds always the ultimate attacking ideas, finds simply a gap in this seemingly drawish positions, finds somehow a winning chance. Leela c0 doesn't play like this. Leela is of course a positional monster, but when it comes to pure calculations, pure tactics, Leela somehow misses the wins and plays only draws. That's why Stockfish has now comfortable 5-point lead in front of Leela c0. So okay, I hope that you enjoyed this game. I really enjoyed it a lot. Interesting ideas of the Leningrad Dutch. If you want to see more beautiful AI chess like this, check out our The Chess Games Played by Computers. Here's the link of the playlist, and if you like this content, hit the subscribe button. See you soon with some more videos, and what do we say in the end? Chess is the best, of course.